I'll quickly jump in. I'll quickly jump in here, and then I'll pass the ball over to Greg for the major part of today's conversation, which will be focused around cloud economics and why AVS is helping our customers move towards a more economically efficient operating model. And so, again, Cooper Smith here, 7 years at VMware. I know that everyone attended, last session with VMC on AWS. Not totally earth-shattering, but I just want to make sure to do a quick 101 on the AVS platform itself, just so we understand, what we're looking at today. And then I also wanted to provide just a few updates from our VMware Explorer around AVS. So let's start with the VM Explorer updates. I think the most critical piece here for the channel community was the announcement of AVS joining the VMware Cloud Universal program. So what that means is we will now be able to sell AVS on VMware paper via a program that is available to basically buy the subscription that is of software platforms included in AVS, VMC on AWS, GCVS, OCVS, Oracle, Google, all the other ones. So there's the Cloud Foundation stack in a subscription model, and we'll be able to start being able to sell AVS on VMware paper. More details to come, as that was hot off the press last week and actually surprised me when it came out. So good news though for our channel community to be able to sell it like y'all sell all of the other VMware solutions today via our enterprise license agreements. Other details, just a lot of different node types available being released. A lot of different integrations and ability to do things like cross-cloud DR. So the availability to do DR from a Azure VMware solution environment to a VMC on AWS solution. So cross-cloud, cross-hyperscaler DR, so that our customers have the flexibility to not put all their eggs in one basket and span and go multi-cloud with VMware. And so that was a pretty interesting one. And so those are the two main ones I'd say available. But if there's any questions regarding VMware Explorer announcements, feel free again to put those in the chat. So I'll move over to just a quick recap on what is AVS before we pass it to Greg. And so I'll share my screen here. And so AVS at its highest level, the elevator pitch messaging is it is the fastest, easiest, and most lowest risk path to Azure for our customers that are VMware on-prem today. Again, it's the fastest path because you're going from VMware to VMware in the cloud. It's the lowest risk because you're not replatforming and refactoring to run on different hypervisor inside of some sort of native cloud solution. And it is the easiest because all of our customers bring the existing skill sets that they've built over the last 20 years around VMware, bring that into the cloud so they can more easily kind of become a cloud admin and start to upskill themselves and move into this modern world of hybrid and multi-cloud operating models. And so what exactly is AVS? So it is the deployment of our VMware software-defined data center stack, so vSphere, vSAN, and NSX, on bare metal nodes. So think of just hyper-converged infrastructure in the cloud. So similar to on-prem, if you've worked with your customers to deploy things like VxRail or vSAN ready nodes, things like that. This is just very similar to that, but with the scalability of cloud. So deploying nodes and additional resources in a matter of minutes versus waiting 6 to 12 months for hardware to be shipped and racked and stacked on-prem. So this is a true scalable cloud based on the VMware software with connections into the native Azure space, so that you can layer on different types of native Azure services, storage services, monitoring services, security services, things like that, or have very low latency access to things our customers are using every day, O365 in Azure, Azure AD, different things like that. So basically bringing that VMware environment into a modern cloud era and doing so inside of Azure in this particular instance. And so I'll go ahead and stop there. That's what we'll be jumping into today, and I'll pass the ball to Greg to start talking about the economic side of the house and why our customers are looking at this as a huge advantage.
Perfect. Well, I'll take over sharing if you don't mind, Cooper.
Yes.
All right. I'm just going to start with, in 15 minutes or so, we're not going to be able to get too far in the weeds. So we're just going to jump in right here and have a little bit of a discussion. So a lot of times when people are hearing about AVS for the first time, Azure VMware Solution, I get the same question, right? It's got to be more expensive than what I'm doing today, or it's got to be more expensive than Azure IaaS, right? Those are basically the two fundamental cost questions that I get over and over and over again. And we calculated 12 months of our TCOs, right? Not all of them in favor of AVS, by the way. So this average is very true to form. But of all the TCOs we did in 12 months, over a 12-month span, we find that AVS has about a 22% better TCO than on-premises. And it has a 32% lower TCO than running Azure IaaS with the same workloads. There's a couple of phenomena that make this possible, and I'm going to talk about them in a little bit greater detail, just so we all kind of understand the basic building blocks here. But one of the big things is that what we find is that when you're comparing to on-prem, customers consolidate significantly in AVS. So when you buy cloud hosts, you don't buy more than what you need. You don't have to buy any for upgrades, right? Microsoft provides those upgrades. They provide a host so that your capacity doesn't shift when you're upgrading. And in the TCOs that we've done, in the analysis that I've done, the customers on average on-prem run about 19 VMs per host. That's in the 12 months that I calculated. In AVS, they run 39 VMs per host. And these hosts are not significantly larger, right? These are about the same size hosts, 576, 36 core boxes. The difference is just you don't have to build for the future. You don't have to try to get a significant life out of a host, right? You just buy what you need at the time you need it. Now, the other kind of very interesting thing is we looked at how long it took to get moved into AVS, and on average, it's about 31 months faster. And for revenue, this is a big deal, right? Because every month that you miss is a month you'll never get back in cloud. So time is a huge factor in both revenue and in moving on to other projects, right? You want to get that project done, you want to get the check, you want to start looking at other projects, which I'm going to talk about another project right now. You probably hear a lot about Azure Hybrid Benefit. It's one of the big advantages Azure has, and AVS kind of inherits this, but not in the way that you might think. One of the big things that AVS does inherit, though, is the 2008-2012 extended support. So we run into customers all the time where they have significant presence of 2008 and 2012. And this is a big project that the partner community is helping solve. They've got big projects with customers to help upgrade these things. But what you can do, and what we see as one big move to AVS, is you can lift and shift these 2008 and 2012 and get extended support from Microsoft. You move them fast. Because if you think about it, if they were easy to upgrade, if the software was supported that was on them, if there weren't barriers to upgrading these things, maybe the barrier is just time, they would already be upgraded. So you can move these to AVS using HCX very quickly without changing anything and risking whatever piece of software is on there kind of clogging up the upgrade. And then you can work with the customer on a 2012 modernization project over the course of the next, 1, 2, 3, even maybe 4 years, depending on if Microsoft extends it that long. The other kind of interesting thing about AVS is you bring your perpetual licenses with you for Windows and SQL, right? So when you bring those with you, you then inherit the Azure hybrid benefit for other things in Azure. So if it's a blend, if you're doing a blended environment for the customer, instead of having to convert those licenses because you're going to decommission the stuff on-prem, you can migrate into AVS. You know, the stuff that needs to go into AVS, you migrate in AVS. Anything that needs to go into Azure IaaS or SQL or other things like that, you have the Azure hybrid benefit to help you with. Now I'm just going to summarize it up just so we can move on to the native comparison. But the big five movers for when you're comparing AVS to on-prem is the consolidation that we talked about. The reserved instance discount is pretty significant because there's only one SKU. And we've looked at this with procurement teams. And what we find is that when you take, let's say, 100 hosts and you look at a 54% discount across the board, that discount is significant when you compare it to the other things that they buy. Maybe you're buying routers and you get a 15% discount, or maybe you're buying hosts and you get a 60% discount. And you all these things mix. Your buying power with each vendor is different. But when you buy AVS, you're buying powers with a single vendor, and with the discount for the reserved instance discount, it really stacks up and affects a huge portion of the spend. The other thing is the redirection of infrastructure care and feeding. Now, what we hear from partners and customers is that the care and feeding, the DC ops, is currently under pricing pressure. It's currently under margin pressure. The customers, they want to do it less and less and less, but you don't want to lose revenue that maybe you're managing hosts like $500 a host, or $10,000 a host, whatever it might be, right? Those, what you can do is you can redirect that into AVS you can still do capacity planning, you can still do VM hardware upgrades, right? There's still some things to do there on VMware. You still have to manage NSX, you can manage vSAN. So you can redirect this kind of care and feeding, break, fix, replace hosts, that labor into higher value projects to get, to help move the customer forward. Maybe that's upgrading their 2012. And then, the customer is probably very low automated. So moving to a highly automated infrastructure is very helpful. And then there's probably these giant pieces of infrastructure that are using a lot of SAN space. They're using a lot of various compute. And you can move these things into, archival, backup services, Azure, like blob storage, things like that. So when you take a look at these kind of incremental things, it adds up into big savings. So next, we're going to look at the Azure comparison with Azure IaaS, and I'm just going to show you one example really quick because I know I touched on the 30%, but I want to kind of show it to you in real world here. And what you see is that the total cost, including migration, is where we make a lot of moves. Let me just kind of highlight it here. When you look at the infrastructure costs, right? AVS and Azure IaaS are very close, but they're not equal. And what happens is the Azure AVS is, you buy it based on the host. So it's a pool of resources, and pools of resources are infinitely more functional than t-shirt sizes, right? You can really oversubscribe. When one VM falls off, another VM takes its place. You can buy larger reserved instances. You can buy more of them because you don't have to negotiate with your app owners to figure out which VMs or what lifespan each VM has. So the pool becomes very efficient. And right about this point here, 300 to 500 VMs, AVS starts to be considerably more efficient. And when you get to 1,000 VMs, the graph really starts to look much more lopsided than it does here. And that's if you just look at compute and storage. And remember, you still have to connect to it, right? So there's no additional services here in the Azure native side. It's just compute and storage. There's no VPN gateways, there's no storage snapshots, nothing, just compute and storage. The other kind of big thing, and this is where a lot of cloud migrations get tripped up, is that the OS compatibility is much different between AVS and Azure IaaS. So typically there's an infrastructure remediation project that has to happen before a move to cloud. And that could be anything from getting off of like Red Hat 6. It could be getting off of, disks that have, maybe there's 10 1 terabyte disks on a video VM or something, right? All these little things add up to a lot of extra time in order to move, and they're really of minimal value. So AVS follows VMware's OS compatibility guide, right? Because you're going to move it HCX, you're not going to change anything on that VM, you're just going to move it, and then you can figure out when it's in Azure, kind of what the best what the best thing to do, because these VMs, what they will do is they will hold back the migration of the critical apps that are going to really make a difference to the customer. The other interesting thing is when you look at how licenses are procured for AVS versus rented in Azure IaaS, you'll see that the perpetual licenses and paying software assurance is considerably less expensive than renting the VM via checking the box when you're building VMs and IaaS. It's significantly cheaper. Now, there's all sorts of custom things that Microsoft can do to kind of rebalance this, but for a customer that's 300, 400, or 500 VMs, they're going to be closer to this than they would be. They probably don't have the pricing power to dictate a huge give. So you'll see, you'll see a really nice advantage for AVS in the Windows licensing and even SQL licensing department for customers that don't have huge lucrative contracts. All right, so just to kind of sum it up, the pools of resources really are more efficient than t-shirt sizes, especially between 300 and 500 VMs and up. There's less risk, so you can buy more 3-year reserved instances than you would because there's less risk. Your need for compute is going up. HCX reduces the time and complexity. We talked about that. You're going to move it and move it fast. And then the other thing that doesn't get enough credit is all of the attached stuff that people have used in their VMware environment over the decades. I mean, huge amounts of attached things, whether it's a logging for the security team, right? They've got something, they know it works, they have a remediation plan. Maybe it's a compliance plan. Maybe it's just the backup plan, right? So the idea is moving to cloud shouldn't include 10,000 other projects that you have to do either during the move or immediately before or after the move, right? What you want to try to do, or what we've seen AVS be successful, is address the customer's very first need, which is normally to exit the data center, to relieve them of pricing pressure of data center, refresh, supply chain, all of these things, unautomated infrastructure. The list goes on and on and on and on. You relieve them of that pressure, save that money for the customer, and then you can loop immediately back around and start chipping away at okay, maybe we want to look at Veeam and get them off of whatever they're currently on, right? Maybe we want to now look at DR with SRM Cloud, right? There's all sorts of, additional projects once we get this one done that we can work on, for all of time. And the math plays out in that way. Over the course of 2 years, I've done probably 300 of these things, and there's probably maybe 10 to 15% where AVS is break even or more expensive than what the customer's currently doing. And I can tell you, when they come into these things, they think it's going to be the other way in most cases. And when you start digging, you start looking, what are you actually paying for maintenance on the SAN? How old is it? How full is it? How many times do you refresh? Oh, you keep that for 7 years. Okay, well, how much you paying the third party for maintenance? 15% a year, the original purchase price of the server. That was one last week. Doesn't take many years to pay for that server again, and then you're back. Why not just refresh it on the 3-year timeline? It's so these things just add up like 1,000, little items, and then boom, before you know it, you look at some sort of timeline and you'd have been much better off buying a service like AVS. Not to mention there's no sleeping in the data center for anybody, which is always nice. All right, well, I think we got 6 minutes left, so somehow I'm right on time. I must have hit enough slides to make Cooper happy, and be happy to take questions.
Yeah, I'm answering a few of the questions live in the chat.
Sure.
But yeah, if there's any other questions, anything we can help with before we wrap up, that was what we wanted to get across today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the breakdown, the cost analysis side by side, comparing all three options. Cooper, Greg, how do our partners get this cost analysis? Who do they gauge? How do they engage you guys?
Yeah, so basically, we have a team, a dedicated AVS team on our side. So if you're working with the VMware team, you can always position a TCO if that is the most logical next step with a customer. Position that with either our team or the core VMware team, who would then engage us, and we can then engage Greg. So that's the most direct way. If you happen to be working directly with Microsoft on an AVS opportunity, because VMware doesn't get involved in every single one, then you can always ask them to engage our team to do a TCO. So even for just purely Microsoft led and run AVS opportunities, which they're growing more and more and becoming more frequent as Microsoft gets trained up on this particular solution more. They also engage our team to do the TCOs, and Greg you'll always eventually find yourself back to our team and Greg for TCOs.
Awesome, thank you. And I mean, when you put it, side by side like this, 3.2 for on-prem, 2.2 AVS, and then native 2.6, it makes it a no-brainer. So I love the breakdown. It makes it easy and visualizing it, just comparing side by side. Does anyone have any other questions as far as a VMware Azure solution while we got the team on the line?
I want to just answer one question live. There was a question that Cooper already responded, but the question was, is there a particular number of workload that's break even or to a point to break even? I will say that it's better for AVS when there's a diverse set of workloads. If a customer comes in and all of their workloads are 2 vCPU and 8 gigs of RAM, then it won't fit as well into the AV36. I mean, because what you're trying to do is you're really trying to use the diverse sizes of VMs to kind of stack up and oversubscribe and utilize the VMware pool of resources to its fullest potential. I responded in the Q&A that the smallest I've seen in AVS's favor is 96, but I would say getting up into the hundreds, 200, AVS really starts to shine. And like I said, when you get above 300, 300 to 400, the cost benefit analysis really gets to be in AVS's favor. But there's so many factors involved. But I'd say about 90% of TCOs are AVS is either parity or lower cost.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Yeah. So just to reiterate that, just so y'all are aware, the 100 VMs is about the break-even point for our smallest cluster size. So when customers say, "Hey, I've got 20 VMs, I want to move," that is not going to be a good economics for them. Not to say people don't do it, because they do. To start their cloud journey, they start with one workload that doesn't make sense financially necessarily, and then they start to retire hardware on-prem and fill that cluster up more and more and more, and it's kind of a journey. But if you're trying to say in one fell swoop, how many VMs do I need to migrate to actually fit into the bare minimum 3-node cluster, it's about 100. So that's kind of your target, 100 or above. If it's slightly below, that's potentially doable. So, and then in terms of do we compare against other clouds, we're starting to do stuff like that with we have a multi-cloud team that can help lead those. That is not Greg. That is a small team that has just more recently been created, because we don't like to compete with ourselves necessarily, but knowing that we are a multi-cloud company and that is our goal, and that customers do want to see that, we do have a team that can help at VMware with that. So if that's a necessary ask, then just work with either your core rep or your AVS rep or your VMC on AWS rep and ask for that, and they'll be able to navigate you to the multi-cloud team that can create those.
Most customers have a very clear preference from what I've seen. Like very, very few say, help me choose a cloud.
Yeah.
They say, I just signed a $100 million MAC with Microsoft, and now I got to move this stuff. That's typically the engagement.
All right. Well, I know we're up on
Perfect,
time,
guys.
so thank y'all for listening in here.
Yep. Thanks, Cooper. Thanks, Greg. I'm sure you guys will be back to host next quarter with more updates on AVS. But other than that, feel free to reach out to me any questions, guys. Appreciate the time today. Take care.
Bye.